Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Call of Cthulhu, which came out in October of last year, so it's a very late review. I played it on the Xbox One. It's also available on the PC, PS4, and Nintendo Switch, I believe. So let's start with this story. You play as Edward Pierce, a private detective who is contracted by the father of a somewhat famous painter from a place known as Darkwater. Her name is Sarah Hawkins, and you're supposed to figure out what happened to her. If you know anything about the concept of Cthulhu, then you know this is very much Lovecraftian horror, and there's going to be all sorts of weird twists, turns, and cults and stuff along the way. And there are, and I actually really enjoyed the story as it went along. I think they did a very good job with it. I think the writing was much better than the last Lovecraftian horror game that I played. I think they did a good job with pretty much all the characters, including the main character, because everybody's having these weird, horrific nightmares, some better than others, and they do a very good job showing you how it's affecting these characters. They did a much better job telling the story of this man who's kind of losing his mind as the story goes on. As for the audio, I will start with saying that I felt like the audio mixing is, well, crap, because there are definitely times, and not just times, I should say it varies regularly, scene from scene, that the volume just shifts. So sometimes it'll be super quiet, sometimes it'll be louder, never too loud, but there are definitely times where everything's way too quiet and I had to crank up my volume. But then at the other times where the volume was normal, I had to turn it back down because I had cranked it up so much. It got to be messy. It was kind of a pain. As for the music, I enjoyed the music in this game. It definitely lent to the atmosphere, which I enjoyed, obviously, because good music creates a much better atmosphere, and in a kind of horror game like this, it's important. As for the sound effects, again, they suffered from the volume issue, so it was kind of hard to determine at times, but I do think they worked for the most part. Voice acting, on the other hand, that was really inconsistent. While the actors did a much better job of portraying these individuals losing their minds and going through suffering and just generally having emotions, you know, there's another game that we won't mention that really failed at that. But they did a much better job in this, but I will say the quality varies. There are times where the quality is good, there's times where it's pretty bad. It's never exceptional though. Now, as for the gameplay mechanics and whatnot of this game, I have mentioned horror, and I will say that there's horror in this game, but it's not like a normal horror game. It's definitely not survival horror, because really there's not a lot of surviving you have to do. There are a few situations that are run, hide, or die, but it's still not that kind of game. It's really very much more of an interactive narrative with some investigative elements. And I gotta say I liked that because it's very much about telling the story. That is the key thing for this game, is telling the story. So going the more interactive narrative route is a much better way of doing things. It is still very much a first-person game. There is one shooty bit, and it's actually a very easy shooty bit because the auto lock in this game is exceptional for that kind of stuff. Now, I pointed out earlier that there were some run, hide, or die elements, and they are there, but it's only in a few points in the game. For the most part, it is walk around and investigate. And normally I don't like run, hide, or die, but I think it worked in the few times that they used it because it wasn't an overbearing element, and it didn't feel like it was there to create a false sense of horror. There are some forced stealth sections, and some of them work better than others. I don't necessarily love that they're in there, but at the same time, they're not complete garbage. I did like the investigation mode that you would go into in certain areas. You'd go look at clues, and he would kind of reconstruct the people, and you'd do that throughout the area until you could put together a story, and I liked the way that they did it. Overall, I think the gameplay mechanics of this game do a good job. Next up, the controls. I think the controls work very well. I was actually really surprised at how well they worked for the game. Not that they need to be overly intense, because there's not a lot of action going on in the game. Like I said, mostly investigation. A lot of people might call it a walking simulator because there is an element of just walking around, exploring, finding out what's going on in the world, and the controls work very well for that. Lastly, the visuals and graphics. Graphically, it's not the most astounding game. You can definitely see that it wasn't made by like a AAA studio on a AAA budget, but it is a pretty good looking game. There are things that they do well. There are, however, things that they don't do as well, like rain effects, those were really bad. And I did run into the occasional, like, individual kind of twitching in place kind of thing. It was a little weird, but it also wasn't horrible, and it didn't really fully take me out of anything. One thing I will say, because I guess I'll just throw it in here, is I like the direction of this game, the visual direction, because they did a good job with switching camera angles and doing all sorts of other things to make you really kind of feel like your character is losing their mind. Which is important because, you know, your character is kind of losing their mind, so... yeah. I like the design of the world, and I do like that they built this kind of old school feel to it, but there's not a lot to say about the visuals. They work well for what is there and what they could do, and they do help tell the story. I'm kind of ambivalent. I don't hate them, I don't love them. Okay, so to wrap this up, I actually enjoyed the overall experience. There were some things that I wasn't fully in love with, but the overall experience I did really enjoy. And given that it's been quite a while, I don't know if it's really dropped in price much, but I just looked it up. It was like $30 to $40, and I think that's a good price point for it. I don't remember how much I paid when I picked it up, because it's been a while. I've had it sitting there waiting to play for quite a while. But I have no complaints with having spent the money on it. I really enjoyed it. Okay, so in the comments below, why don't you tell me if you read the Necronomicon? Yeah, we're going back to having read books. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.